So class 1 was the introduction, and I really liked how it defines the good life as having a balance of experiences and emotions. Class 2 was positive psychology, and it talks about optimism isn't just being bubbly and naive all the time, but it's taking your circumstances and looking at them as controllable and not lasting forever. Class 3 was about flourishing, so I really enjoyed taking the signature strengths test to find out my strengths so I could better utilize them in my life. Class 4 was about achieving authentic happiness, and it talks about optimism for the future and the explanatory styles, so recognizing the difference between something being permanent or temporary and specific or universal. Class 5 was about the how of happiness, and I love Lou Brzezinski's happiness pie chart percentages. So happiness comes 50% from your set point, 10% from your circumstances, and 40% from being intentional about your activities. Class 6 was about positivity, and I like the Lasota ratio, which is we need to strive to have a ratio of 3 good thoughts to 1 bad thought. Flow was class 7, and I learned what was necessary to achieve flow, and one that stood out to me is that we need to participate effortlessly with deep involvement to reach that flow state. Class 8 was about meaning and achievement, and I learned that the amount of happiness or unhappiness that we have doesn't predict the suicide rates, but the lack of meaning does. Class 9 was about the world's happiest places, and you are considered to be thriving if you rate yourself as very happy, which is an 8 out of 10 on the happiness scale. Class 10 is why we do what we do, and it talks about intrinsic motivation and how it's a catalyst for richer experiences and more creativity. Class 11 was about the self-determination theory, and my favorite part of the self-determination theory is autonomy, where we are free to act and choose for ourselves what we do, which is like agency, but it's a personal freedom to behave responsibly. Class 12 was about the time famine, and one way we get a time famine is through time deepening, which is multitasking, trying to fit more hours in the day than we actually have, and in reality it just loses meaning for all activities. Class 13 was about taking back your time. So children are losing their time by being overscheduled in school and in sports, and this leads to a drop 50% in playing outside, which is sad. Class 14 is about the digital age. So when talking about disconnected aloneness, I liked the difference between the definitions of loneliness and solitude. So loneliness is the pain of being alone, while solitude is the glory in being alone. Class 15 was about intentional families, and it talked about family rituals, how they must be repeated, coordinated, and create meaning to induce the connection and identity in our families. Class 16 went further into family rituals and the routes we can take to introducing them. And the first one is the direct route, where you offer your ideas tentatively and you try it out. But the indirect way is you just make it happen and see if it sticks and if your family likes it. The class 17 was about the last child in the woods and the nature deficit disorder. So it really affects our health. So there's higher rates of physical and emotional illness because we're not going outside. Class 18 is about the experience economy. So to have an extraordinary experience, it goes from being ordinary to memorable to meaningful and then to transformative, which leads to a change in our identity. Class 19 was about fostering empathy. So we talked about living in the box, so being convinced other people and our circumstances are responsible for our feelings and helplessness to overcome them. So it's not healthy for our relationships at all, so we need to get out of the box. Class 20 was about design thinking. So the idea of ideating and getting unstuck. So brainstorming is really important, so having quantity over quality. So even if they're the worst ideas ever, they really create we have our more creative juices. Class 21 is about design your life intro. So if you have passion for something, it usually comes after you try something and figure out if you like it, not just from thinking about it. Class 22 was wayfinding and the Odyssey plans. So I really liked how it says that you should never choose the first solution to any problem, because there's more solutions that are more creative and better. Class 23 was about prototyping and how prototyping allows you to try and fail quickly before you over-invest in a path that you choose. So it's an easy way to help you figure out your life. And then class 24 was about choosing happiness. So it's important to have a life design team to brainstorm and bounce ideas off of, and they're a really good support for you in designing your life. So these are the principles that I learned in creating a good life class that I really enjoyed.